Greg shit his pants. No, I didn't. And it was just a fart. Anyway, whoever smelt it dealt it. Right, Dad? Greg, stop farting on everybody and read the rules for the winter camping badge again so the whole troop knows what they're in for this weekend. I already read them. Well, do it again. Steve wasn't listening. I could hear him snoring from over here. Steve, wake up. My dad said so. Wake up, Steve. We're going over the rules again for your personal benefit, okay? Yeah, okay. Mr. Grupe, I'm awake. For winter camping honours, scouts must erect a tent in the snow and spend one night outside during winter months. Sufficient cold weather gear must be worn at all times, and the scout leader will verify. As he went on about the rules, I let my mind briefly relax and looked at the road ahead. Snow was piled up on either side of Highway 7 and the pavement was slushy but well salted. The landscape was so different up here in the winter. I thought to myself, I had only ever been up to the cabin in summer. Ever since I can remember, I've been going up north every year to Bronze Lake. My family cabin sits at the end of a narrow peninsula which serves as a grassy driveway to our tiny shack of a cabin. No electricity, no running water and no furnace. We would be chopping our own wood and building fires to stay warm.
But the forecast had predicted
mild weather, and we had plenty of blankets and warm weather gear. Be prepared, that's what they always say, so we brought all kinds of gear with us. I had gone for my winter camping badge when I was a kid and had fond memories of the experience. We had gone hiking and had snowball fights and made s'mores around the campfire, but this was different. I was suddenly realizing with dawning appreciation. I had gone to a scout camp and there had been plenty of other people around, not to mention a heated cabin to go to when we got too cold. The minivan had plenty of gas and could keep us warm in an emergency, unless it breaks down. A voice in the back of my head said. I tried to shrug it off. Right, Dad? I realized my son Greg had been talking to me while I was zoned out. What's up, Greg? I said the turn is coming up soon. I almost missed it, but slowed down just in time to turn onto the gravel side of the road. Here we go. Another 15 minutes or so and we'll be there. Are you guys excited? Yeah, came the timid reply from the back. Suddenly the five of them were so quiet. Could they sense my apprehension? What do you guys want to do first when we get to the lake? You want to go ice fishing or have a snowball fight? Snowball fight! The chatter started up again and I was happy they were conversing again. At least they seemed excited. The side roads were icy and more slippery than the highway, and I slowed down considerably to navigate them. I heard Gibson whining from the seat next to me and reached over quickly to stroke her fur. Our old Cocker Spaniel was getting up in years, but she had always loved going out to the cabin. Even she seemed nervous about it. I thought, maybe she just needs to pee. We'll be there in a minute, Gibby, I told her soothingly. My words didn't reassure her. Instead, her ears perked up and she suddenly sat bolt upright in the passenger seat. Her eyes were wide and looking ahead. I looked out of the windshield again and just in time to see something tall and lanky ducking into the trees ahead. It disappeared into the woods and was impossible to see as we drove past. A hunter, I assumed. Just a very tall one. The man was easily 7 feet tall. Gibson settled back down onto the passenger seat and I turned onto Brookside Road. It was even less well maintained and the salt was sparse, causing the car to skid occasionally on the black ice. Continuing on this road for a while, I kept my eyes open for the sign that would turn onto Drescher Lane. The gravel would turn into just 2 ruts of dirt in the grass once we reached the turn, and in the winter, with all the snow on the ground, we wouldn't even have that. I wondered if we would even be able to drive up the steep hill that led to the cabin, or if we would have to walk the kilometre or so from there. "Here it is, boys," I announced, seeing the blue street sign that had been put up there the year before. "Drescher Lane." Gibson sat up to look as well, and all the boys quieted in the back. We'd been driving for hours, and they were anxious to see the cabin where we would be spending the weekend. I was surprised to see that the gate was swinging open. I thought to myself, Mr. Drescher must have forgotten to close it. I mean, their property sat on the side of the road leading in, as did a few other cottages. We all knew each other up there. I wondered if somebody was up in the lake ice fishing. That would be a relief, I thought. Just to have someone else around, it would be nice in case of an emergency. Seeing a car parked in the space beside the Drescher cottage made me break into a big smile. I wouldn't have been the only responsible grown-up on the lake for the weekend. Even if we never interacted, just their presence would be reassuring. I rolled down the window as I passed and saw Mr. Drescher coming out of his cottage. He appeared to be loading up his car to go home. I realized my heart sunk. So much for the backup. "Mr. Drescher, I guess we're just catching you on the way out," I called out the window to him. He appeared surprised to see us. He walked over to his car and put a suitcase inside hurriedly, then came over to the driver's side window of the minivan, taking quick little steps to avoid slipping on the ice.
"Hello there, young Mr. Grupe. Oh, you've got the scout troop with you as well, I see. Very, good to see you out here."
He looked nervous and his eyes met mine and locked onto them.
"Can you help me bring a couple of things out? I'm getting on in years and my arthritis is acting up. Something fierce in this cold weather."
"Sure," I said. It was strange. I had never talked to the man that much, but I was happy to help. I got out of the van after putting the parking brake on and left it running to keep the boys warm while I helped Mr. Drescher. Following him inside, he closed the door behind us.
"Listen," he said, "this is a mistake. You shouldn't be up here. You should turn around and go back. Just make up an excuse, say whatever you have to. But do not spend the night here."
The old man was losing it. I realized suddenly, what the hell was he talking about? "What do you mean, Mr. Drescher? We just got up here. We drove 5 hours to get here." I started backing away from him as he twitched, and I saw a bit of foamy dribble pouring from the corner of his mouth. I found the doorknob behind me with my hand. I turned around to look, and he was on me, grabbing my shirt collar and pulling me towards him. He screamed at me with a face reddened and his eyes streaming in tears.
"Do not stay the night there. I'm begging you. The owls watch as insatiable wolves feast and foraging mushrooms run rampant."
I pushed him off me and ran back to the van and pulled the door handle, my feet slipping on the ice and almost sending me flying. I grabbed the door and managed to stay upright. then leaped inside and hit the gas, driving off as we all heard the old man screaming at us from his doorway.
Don't stay here! It's going to get cold! There will be no one here to save you from him!
His voice faded in the distance and the boys didn't say anything. I could sense 6 sets of eyes on me as the dog and all of them stared up at me. Sorry, boys, I stammered. He's not usually like that.
Is that supposed to make us feel better?
Peter, the troublemaker, yelled from the back of the seat. I wasn't sure what to say. The whole weekend seemed to be going off the rails. Was he right? Should we just go back? I would have to double check the weather forecast once we got there, but it had called for good weather just this morning when we left. Still, this whole thing seemed like a bad omen.
That old guy was probably just off his meds,
Stephen muttered. More likely he's self-medicating a bit too much with some mushrooms of questionable legality. Gibson was whining at me from the passenger seat, sitting up and staring at me, her eyes wide and worried. I kept left at the fork in the road, and the tires spun a few times with icy slushy, but we managed to get up the steep hill leading up to the cabin. The woods closed in on us on both sides, and all around us suffocating in a way that I found vaguely uncomfortable. Which was strange, because I'd always loved the forest up there. We passed the other cottages and saw no one else on the lake, at least so far. I held out hope for a few ice fishermen who sometimes visited the lake in the colder months. At least, that's what my uncle had told me. He also enjoyed ice fishing and visited the lake occasionally in the winter. The lake closed in on both sides as we neared the cottage and began to drive down the narrow peninsula. At the lowest point, the water was just a foot away on either side of the section. Occasional flooding would render it impassable. Finally, we drove up a rise and around a bend, and the cabin came into sight. The boys groaned from the back seat as they saw it. Is this it? It's just a frickin' shack. Told you guys it wasn't much. It was slightly irritating hearing them criticize our family cabin, but they were just kids, so I shrugged it off. I turned the car around in the slightly less narrow spot we used for that purpose and backed the van right up to the front door to unload our supplies. Relief flooded me once again once I looked on the lake and saw a fishing hut out there. It appeared to be well maintained, and there were tracks leading up to and around it. We weren't alone after all. There would be other people on the lake for the weekend, and in case of an emergency, I could always call them for help, if the battery died in the minivan, for instance. It wasn't like we could call roadside assistance out there, and besides, the cell signal was spotty at best on the lake. Boys, look. A nice fisherman. Maybe they can show us a thing or two on how to cut a hole in the ice.
What? You don't know how to do that?
Peter again.
My dad says an idiot can cut a hole in the ice for fishing.
I tried to come up with a snappy remark, but came up empty. Instead, I settled for muttering something under my breath and getting out and slamming the car door behind me. Damn kid was already getting on my nerves. Gibson was at my heels as I unlocked the door to the cabin and stepped inside. It was cold in there, but at least there was no wind. It was whipping up pretty fierce, coming off the lake, and felt brutally frigid out there. I went through the cabin and checked every room for wildlife and potential weather damage. We've always had problems with mice and occasionally bats that would get inside, but the place was fine and there hadn't been any weather damage from earlier winter storms. Just the standard scatterings of mouse turds, cobwebs and spiders. The first goal in my mind was to get some wood into the fireplace and start warming up the cabin. We would keep it burning at all times, and I would have to keep reminding the boys to stoke the fire and keep the front and back doors closed to the place to stay warm. I went out the front door and found the boys were already building snow forts at the distance of about 15 feet from each other. They were amassing piles of snowballs for an impending battle as well. Since there were 5 of them, it would be 3 on 2, slightly uneven odds, and the snow forts were already showing signs of that since the one on the right was already larger. No sense in interrupting, I decided, and just fetched the wood myself. You're only a kid once, after all. I would build the fire and get it going while they were having their fun. In an hour or 2 they would need to start assembling their tents, since it got dark early up there. I found some dry wood beneath the cabin where we stored piles of it, but kindling was another story altogether. It was harder to find small pieces of dry wood, and by the time I found enough, my feet were beginning to feel frozen and frostbitten. Back in the cabin, Gibson watched as I built a little teepee structure in the fireplace. She had been playing with the boys for a while, but was now following me and watching me closely again. I couldn't help but get the continued impression that she was nervous about something. The slightly damp wood took a while to catch fire, but eventually I managed to get it burning. I would have to keep an eye on it, I realized, as it was being temperamental at times. I went out the front and called the boys in from their snowball fight. They moaned and groaned for a minute, but then came over to the front door of the cabin, their faces red from the cold, but still no signs of wanting to come inside. I spoke from the top of the stairs and told them my expectations. They would have to start work on their tents immediately, since it was getting dark in a couple of hours. 3 of you will sleep outside tonight, 2 tomorrow night, since we're going to have only 1 tent. Any volunteers? Anyone want to go out tonight? I noticed Peter, the constant pain in the arse, didn't volunteer for the first night. Greg and Steve and Ricky stuck up their hands after a few moments of hesitation. Okay, so it'll be Greg, Ricky and Steve tonight, Peter and Jeff tomorrow night. So, you 2 are in the cabin with me and Gibson tonight. Help them put up their tent, and then you can all come inside and get warm by the fire for a while. They gave their reluctant assent, and I went back inside and left them to their work. I remembered it being brutally cold when I had done my winter camping badge. I had kept my boots on all night and was afraid to even go outside to pee, thinking I wouldn't be able to get warm again afterwards, but I also remembered feeling like I had really accomplished something afterwards, and I was proud of myself for that. I checked the fire. It was guttering again, and I stoked it for a few minutes and put fresh wood on to get it going again. Everything was a bit damp at this rate. The cabin would never get warm. I looked over and saw Gibson was shivering. I pulled her close to me and hugged her near the fire as I warmed up my hands. The kettle caught my eye, and I remembered that hot chocolate was a thing that existed. What better way to bribe the boys into thinking that I was a good scout leader and professional adult? I filled the blackened old kettle up with water and put it on the stove to boil. Then I grabbed a box of instant hot chocolate from our food supplies. The place was beginning to warm up slightly, which was nice, but I still kept my hat and gloves on. At least the dog was no longer shivering. By the time the boys came inside, I had their mugs of hot chocolate ready for them, and they each drunk theirs with big gulps and without complaint, taking turns warming their hands by the fire and playing with the dog. There were suddenly wet boot prints all throughout the cabin, despite my constant reminders to take off their shoes before coming inside. But I decided to let that slide and took out the guitar while the boys made hot dogs and s'mores on the little indoor stove. The cottage was warm and lit with the flickering light and the glow of half a dozen kerosene lamps. I nearly had a heart attack each time the boys got near them, and I was constantly yelling at them to be careful, since tipping over one could easily be the death of all of us. As the night wore on and after songs were sung and hot dogs were roasted and eaten, I decided it was time for bed. The 3 boys, including my son Greg, were sent out into the cold winter air to sleep in their tent for the night, to receive their winter camping badges. I felt a pang of regret and deep concern sending the 3 of them out there. Gibson began to whine and scratch at the door after they left and wouldn't leave the spot. She fell asleep on the damp welcome mat later that night. I had a very difficult time falling asleep. The fire kept going out and I kept getting up to put more wood on and try to get it going again. Gibson eventually got too cold and came over to the fire while I was poking it, trying to coax more heat from the embers. She was shivering and I brought her up to the sofa bed near me. Peter and Jeff were sleeping in the cots near the fire and looked warm enough in their sleeping bags, but it was freezing, since I kept having to get up to manage the fire. I managed to fall into a fitful sleep and had a terrible nightmare. There was something clawing at the windows and doors of the cabin. The wind was howling outside and the fire had long ago gone out. In my dream, I stood up from the bed and saw the 2 boys were frozen to death in their cots. They were blue with hypothermia and there was frost everywhere inside the cabin. The windows were covered with ice which was spreading rapidly, like a fungus in Fast Forward. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Someone or something was scratching at the windows and doors on all sides. The sound is like nails on a blackboard, like something with talons or long claws dragging them across the surface. My heart is pounding, my throat, it's dry. I woke up and sat bolt upright, my body covered in cold sweat. Scratch, scratch, scratch. That sound, I can feel my heartbeat in my throat. My stomach feels like a ball of lead as I walk to the door. Gibson is scratching at it in panic. At first I think she just needs to pee again, but then I hear the sounds of screaming outside.
They're gone, Mr. Grupe! Greg and Ricky and Steve, they're all gone! Where did they go?
I ran over to the tent through the freshly fallen snow. There were no tracks anywhere to indicate someone coming and taking them, nothing to indicate that they had left to go for an early morning hike. They were just gone, their sleeping bags empty and the tent abandoned. Gibson looked up at me with her brown eyes wide and worried. I'm not sure, but they'll be back. They're probably just going for a hike or something. Part of me knew what I said wasn't true. The weather was very cold, and my voice in my mind whispered back to me, "You shouldn't have stayed here. You should have left when you had the chance." No, wasn't that terrifying. Congratulations, Jordan. That has definitely intrigued me, and I'm looking forward to reading part 2. As you can see from the start of this, the amazing, talented author behind this story is Jordan Grupe. Now, I have got very little to say in the way of experience beyond every story of theirs that I have read have been an absolute pleasure, and I have been so privileged to be able to have them and release them on my channel. I won't hold up the conversation too much because I know how boring it is having someone like me at the end of a story just basically talking crap, but I want to say thank you to everyone that's jumped on so far. I went up over the course of 2 days from 500 to 720 subscribers. I don't think you guys realize how amazing that is, especially for someone like me who didn't see this channel really taking off. I honestly thought I would be a 300 subscriber channel for the rest of my time doing this. Just seeing the growth has honestly just brought warmth to me. If you want me to read stories that you've written, I will be more than happy to do so. You've got 2 ways to provide them to me. You can do so by emailing the email address that's in the description of all of my videos, or you can upload them to me directly on my story submission Reddit, which I'm looking at on a regular basis and putting those stories into a catalogue so I can get them released. A little bit of a bonus for everybody, I'm going to be trying to up my release schedule. So originally I was only doing 1 a week. I am thinking, because you guys seem to be relating a lot to this, I'll take it up to hopefully 3 a week. That's the goal. Well, I don't really know what else to add here. I'm not very good at these ending monologues. This is still only my 3rd time trying them, so I won't carry this out too long, but I will hope and wish for all of you to be having a wonderful time, being safe and healthy wherever you are. And I hope with all of my heart that you continue to have a good night or day, and that I see you on the next upload. But hey, as always, this is Grim, and I'm signing off.